16th, the Turkish people went to the polls to show their support for a landmark constitutional referendum. And by Turkish people, I mean barely more than half the Turkish people. And by constitutional referendum, I mean resurrection of the Ottoman Empire. Yes, a minute majority of Turks have bestowed sultan-like powers to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He now has the power, nay, the right, to issue decrees, declare emergency rule, draw up budgets, to appoint ministers and top state officials, to dissolve the parliament, and in general overhaul the entire governance system into an executive presidency model that abolishes the office of prime minister. It also allows Erdogan to stay in the presidency until 2029, aka for life. Still, you might be thinking that this is just a consolidation of power, typical of any secular dictator. The fact is that this is something else entirely.
It is a very serious changes are underway for Turkey's future.
This referendum was the culmination of a 30-year campaign by Erdogan to not just accumulate supreme executive power, but to remove any obstacles to Islamic rule of Turkey. As one Turkish writer puts it, what this presidential system looks like is the Islamic Caliphate system in terms of its mechanism.
I think Erdogan clearly sees himself as the founder of the new caliphate, the world Islamic government, with Turkey at its center.
The Turkish Ottoman Empire was the last legitimate Sunni Islamic caliphate, ruling over nearly the entire Arab world for 400 years until it was dissolved following defeat in World War I. That's when Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the George Washington of Turkey, established the Republic of Turkey, a secular, Western-style nation-state, putting in place severe restrictions designed to keep Islam out of the political process at all costs, with the military being, quote, the guardians of democracy, charged with overthrowing the government when it veered too far from the path Ataturk had set. Erdogan's entire career has been defined by an effort to roll back these restrictions, and with this recent referendum, he's finally achieved his ultimate goal.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan once said, "Democracy is like a streetcar. When you come to your stop, you get off."
Back in 1997, Erdogan was a member of the Islamic Welfare Party when it was ousted by the Turkish military and banned from politics for 5 years. He was released in 2001, and that year led his new party, the AK Party, to electoral victory. Since then, he has systematically purged civic life of anti-Islamists and totally destroyed the military's ability to be a check on Islamist ambitions. According to The New Yorker, in 2007, police arrested the first of hundreds of people whom the government accused of forming a secret organization devoted to keeping Islamist aspirations in check. The case spread to include not just former military and police officers, but also academics, journalists, and aid workers, the core of the opposition to the new Islamic order. In all, some 600 people were convicted, including scores of senior generals in the Turkish military and several prominent journalists. That was just a light dusting compared to the deep clean that took place in 2016. The military coup d'etat attempt in July of that year was the deadliest in Turkey's history, and the first to have failed. The insurrection was put down, and after he restored order, Erdogan had the excuse he needed to implement the purge he'd always wanted. Over 97,000 public servants were dismissed, and a further 37,000 suspended. Legal action started against 103,000 people, of whom 41,000 are remanded in custody. 158 media outlets were closed, including 60 television and radio stations. More than 150 journalists were arrested, and 10,000 members of the media have lost their jobs, and thousands are awaiting trial for tweets and other social media posts. The end result of this abortive coup was that Erdogan was more powerful than ever, and he had the justification he needed to rid public life of anyone who would stand in his way. It couldn't have worked out better if he'd planned it all himself. Erdogan actually called the coup a gift from God, giving him the tools he needed to create what he called a new Turkey. Well, that new Turkey appears to be a throwback to the very, very old Turkey. As Prime Minister Davutoglu said in 2015 that Turkey will, quote, refound the Ottoman state, or as a parliamentarian tweeted, quote, the 90-year-long commercial break of a 600-year-old empire is now over. This is not just about Turkey becoming more overtly Muslim. This is about using Islam as a unifying force in the region and using historical precedent to reclaim land that once belonged to the Ottomans. It's well known that Turkey has long given aid to the Islamic State. Well, now they're using the problem they helped to create to lay claim to Middle Eastern lands, including the Iraqi city of Mosul and the Islamic State capital of Raqqa. But the Middle East is not the only place where Erdogan's Turkey sees room for expansion. Greece is also on the chopping block, with the Turkish nationalist leader saying if they, the Greeks, want to fall into the sea again, if they want to be hunted down, they are welcome. The Turkish army is ready. Indeed, Erdogan is distancing himself from all of Western Europe, a fact that became clear during the campaign leading up to this week's referendum. About 4.6 million Turkish migrants now live in Europe, with about half of those living in Germany. According to a recent study, assimilation into European society is not a priority for those Turks, with foreigners who come to live in Germany tending to remain strangers even after 50 years and 3 generations in some cases. This is a state of affairs that Erdogan has no problem with, and in fact actively encourages, saying, yes, integrate yourselves into German society, but don't assimilate yourselves. The place in which you are living and working is now your homeland and new motherland. Stake a claim to it. And as the vote drew near, Erdogan's rhetoric got only more extreme, vowing to mobilize the Islamic world against Eurofascism, saying, quote, "This matter is not a matter merely for Turkey. This fascism that shows its dirty face is negatively impacting all Muslims and foreigners living in Europe." But of course he knows that it's really all the Pope's fault, saying, "All the leaders of the EU countries went to the Vatican and listened to the Pope submissively. The situation is quite loud and clear. It is a crusader alliance." April 16th will also be the day to evaluate this. Erdogan is painting the modern international struggle as a conflict between Islam and the West, the Ummah, and Christendom, and the April 16th referendum was confirmation of this view. President Erdogan now has all the trappings of an imperial ruler: the dictatorial powers, the religious underpinnings, control of the media, and even a royal palace. With this referendum, Turkey has revived the Ottoman Empire in all but name, and should they decide to follow through with their imperial ambitions, there would be very little in the way to stop them, and Western Europe would be hard-pressed to defend itself with millions and millions of unassimilated Turkish Muslims already within their border.
Turkey is the strongest military power, military might in the region. It's the second largest army in NATO. And the statements coming out of Turkey should be very concerning to Americans. Erdogan is saying 1.5 billion Muslims are waiting for the Turkish government to rise.
Medeniyet çıkacaktır. Ve bu medeniyet inanıyorum ki 21. asırda İslam medeniyetinin öne ve Müslümanlar bıraktığı yerden tekrar bu emaneti teslim alacaklardır. Bize göre demokrasi hiçbir zaman amaç olamaz. Demokrasi ancak ilmi noktada ele aldığımız zaman bir araç olduğunu.
company in Wisconsin offering employees microchips to replace ID badges. It's hosting a chip day party to implant the devices in the employees. And our guy Ron Mott is at the party. Hey, Ron, how is it?
Great. Melissa got chipped yesterday, but you had to be talked into doing this. How long did it take you to say yes to this?
I was a little hesitant at first, but I had 7 days to think about it. And once I learned the facts, there was no question in my mind.
Okay, one last thing we want to show you over here. Hold on, Matt. Go ahead, Steve. They can buy their goodies here in the break room by just using their hand. Real quickly, he's going to get a Kit Kat bar. And it's paid for $1.06, guys. So the question again, as we asked you last week, are you ready to be chipped, guys? Let's send it back to you.